Sometimes it's what comes out later, after the fact, that really makes you think. Take Igor Strelkov-Gherkin, right? A key Russian rebel commander back in 2014. He actually admitted quite openly that the Crimean parliament's vote to join Russia wasn't exactly spontaneous. Said his forces kind of played a role in persuading them. It definitely makes you look at the whole annexation differently, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And what's really striking there is Gherkin's admission doesn't just question the legality, under international law. It also shines a light on how these things could potentially be manipulated elsewhere.
Yeah.
How outside influence can really twist what looks like a democratic choice.
Exactly. And that's what we're digging into today. The whole long story of the Russo-Ukrainian War. It's got deep roots, very distinct phases, stuff that often got lost in the day-to-day news until the big invasion happened. So we've pulled together a pretty comprehensive overview to try and give you the bigger picture.
Yeah, because let's face it, the amount of information out there is just huge. It can be completely overwhelming. Our goal here is really just to boil it down, find the crucial bits, the turning points, the core dynamics, just to help make sense of this ongoing crisis.
Right. And for this deep dive, we're mainly leaning on the Wikipedia entry on the war. It's incredibly detailed, cover the timeline, the causes, the consequences. It's pretty robust. So, yeah, we're here to walk you through the essentials. From those first sparks in 2014 right up to the very worrying situation now. Okay, let's unpack this. Where did this conflict really start? What were the seeds?
Well, to get the roots, you kind of have to glance back a bit. Ukraine's independence, things like the Orange Revolution, those were moments where Ukraine was clearly trying to, forge its own way. And that inevitably created some friction with Russia, given their, let's say, historical and geopolitical interests there.
Okay, and then came early 2014, the immediate trigger.
That was the Euromaidan protests, the Revolution of Dignity. That led to Viktor Yanukovych leaving power, the president who was, seen as pro-Russian.
Right.
And that then sparked these pro-Russian protests popping up in the southeast of Ukraine.
So that was the inflection point.
Definitely a major one. Yanukovych leaving created this kind of power vacuum, and Moscow was clearly very uneasy about Ukraine looking towards the West, and that's when Russia acted swiftly.
Almost instantly, wasn't it? These unmarked Russian troops started showing up in Crimea, the little green men, as they were called. They quickly took over key buildings, like the Crimean parliament itself.
And that occupation was the setup for the annexation, as we heard with Gherkin. That referendum afterwards was, highly contested. With those unidentified soldiers around, the parliament dismissed the existing government, put in a pro-Russian one. Some people call it the Crimean coup for that reason, highlighting the lack of real authority.
Right. And that vote, the one Gherkin admitted helping orchestrate that, paved the way for Russia to just formally annex Crimea. And it wasn't just boots on the ground. Russia's Federation Council, their upper house of parliament, they actually approved using armed force in Ukraine. That was March 2014.
Ukraine's reaction was immediate, called it an act of aggression. I mean, it was a clear violation of sovereignty, international law, set a really dangerous precedent, for how border disputes might be handled.
And it wasn't just conventional military stuff either, was it?
No, not at all.
During the annexation, Russia launched pretty significant cyber attacks, too. Hit government websites, news outlets, even officials' phones. Really messed with communications, caused a lot of confusion.
Yeah, that early use of cyber attacks really showed what we now call hybrid warfare, right? Mixing military moves with digital disruption.
Exactly. It wasn't just about causing chaos. It was about controlling the information flow, making Ukraine feel vulnerable.
The whole Crimean annexation, quick as it was really just the opening act.
Yeah, sadly true. So moving into April 2014, things escalated massively in the Donbass, in eastern Ukraine.
That's when Russian-backed militants started seizing towns, cities, and they declared these so-called People's Republics, the DPR and LPR.
And it's crucial to understand this wasn't just some local thing bubbling up on its own.
Oh, absolutely not. Russia was providing serious covert support. We're talking personnel, tanks, heavy artillery. That backing was absolutely essential for those separatist groups to grab and hold territory.
In the International Criminal Court, the ICC, they've looked at this. They assessed it as both a national and an international conflict. Basically recognizing Russia was heavily involved.
Precisely. And the European Court of Human Rights went further, ruling Russia had effective control over the DPR and LPR right from 2014.
So what were the key moments then in that Donbass phase?
Well, you had strategic spots like Savermahyla and Debaltseve. Ukraine actually managed to get control of them briefly, but that progress was met with direct Russian artillery fire coming across the border, hitting Ukrainian troops inside Ukraine.
That's undeniable direct involvement.
Undeniable. Then, in August 2014, you had what many called the Russian invasion. Russia sent in this convoy, calling it humanitarian.
Right, I remember that. But Ukraine suspected it was carrying weapons, maybe even bodies of Russian soldiers.
That was a huge escalation. After the convoy, Russian paratroopers actually occupied a town called Emrasivka. Lots of armor, artillery support, and there was another push near Novorossiysk, which made people worry they were aiming for Mariupol.
And Russia's explanation.
That their soldiers crossed the border by accident.
By accident, right.
Didn't exactly convince many people internationally.
And the evidence just kept piling up, didn't it? NATO kept saying they were seeing Russian troops, tanks, artillery inside Ukraine all through 2014.
Repeatedly. And it became clear the separatists often had better gear, a technical edge.
How so?
Likely because they were getting advanced Russian systems, things like good anti-aircraft weapons, drones for spotting targets, secure comms, electronic warfare gear.
Electronic warfare like jamming or disrupting enemy systems.
Exactly. Stuff Ukraine mostly didn't have at that point. It really hampered Ukraine's ability to fight back effectively.
Shows it was much more than just an internal fight.
Way more.
So in the middle of all this fighting, there was an attempt to cool things down, right? The Minsk II Agreement, February 2015.
Yeah, that was the idea.
Yeah.
A ceasefire, a path towards some kind of political settlement.
Right.
But it never really stuck. It was never fully implemented. In fact, one of the biggest violations happened almost immediately after the ceasefire was supposed to start.
What happened?
A massive Russian-backed offensive on Debaltseve, a really strategic town.
So despite the ceasefire agreement?
Despite the agreement, they launched this huge assault, surrounded the Ukrainian troops there. The Ukrainians eventually had to pull back under intense fire. It was a really costly retreat.
And didn't some rebel leaders openly say they wouldn't stop fighting there?
They did. They basically said the ceasefire didn't apply to Debaltseve.
Wow. And the international reaction?
Strong condemnation. Ukraine, the EU, the US, they all accused Russia and its proxies of just trashing the agreement. And there were widespread reports of direct Russian military involvement in that Debaltseve assault, too.
So after that, the war in Donbass kind of settled into a different pattern.
Yeah, it became much more static. You can think of it like trench warfare. Lots of ceasefire violations, shelling, gunfire, but the front lines didn't move much for years.
But static doesn't mean peaceful.
Oh, not at all.
Mm-hmm.
The human cost kept rising, casualties mounted on both sides, and you still had flare-ups like the really intense battle for Avdiivka in 2017 showed how volatile things still were.
Then President Zelensky came in 2019. Ending the war in the East was a major promise, wasn't it?
It was a key part of his platform. And we did see some positive signs, like prisoner exchanges between Ukraine and the separatists.
That must have offered some hope.
A glimmer, maybe? But the fundamental issues weren't resolved. You know, getting Russian-backed forces out, how to hold elections in those areas. Those were still huge sticking points. No real progress on a lasting peace.
Which sort of brings us ominously towards early 2022, the lead up to the full-scale invasion. Russia's language started changing, right? Getting harsher.
Definitely. Moscow really ramped up the accusations, accusing Ukraine of stirring up tensions, pushing Russophobia.
Russophobia, like an irrational fear or hatred of Russia?
That was the term they used, yeah. And claiming Ukraine was suppressing Russian speakers' rights. These accusations came alongside a whole list of security demands aimed at Ukraine, NATO, Europe.
And Putin himself made some pretty extreme statements around that.
He did. Even claimed that Russophobia is a first step towards genocide, which, it has to be said, the international community widely rejected as baseless.
And then there was that speech, February 21st, 2022.
A really crucial moment. He basically questioned Ukraine's right to even exist as a state, used these inaccurate historical arguments, claiming Ukraine never had real statehood, misrepresenting Lenin's role, stuff like that.
And around the same time, the fighting in Donbass flared up again.
Massively. Started around February 17th, both sides blaming each other for starting it.
But what was really happening?
Well, there was a huge, sharp increase in shelling from the Russian-led militants. Ukraine and its allies saw this as a clear provocation. Like they were trying to bait Ukraine into reacting to create a pretext for Russia to intervene more broadly.
And then the separatist leaders ordered evacuations.
Yeah, these supposed emergency evacuations of civilians, though analysts pointed out a real evacuation like that would take way longer. At the same time, Russia's disinformation machine went into overdrive, state media pumping out stories about alleged Ukrainian attacks on Russia.
And there were signs they were staging things, false flags.
Disturbing evidence started to emerge, yeah, suggesting Russia was actually faking incidents, attacks, to build their case, create a justification for military action.
And then, February 24th, 2022, Putin announces the special military operation.
That was it. Stated goals: demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine.
Denazifications. That was widely seen as propaganda, right? Falsely linking the Ukrainian government to Nazis.
Completely baseless propaganda, yes.
Yeah.
That announcement marked the start of the full-scale invasion, met with instant, almost universal international condemnation. Severe sanctions on Russia followed very quickly.
Russia's initial plan seemed to be a quick strike on Kyiv.
Looked like it. A broad offensive trying to grab the capital fast, but they ran into incredibly fierce resistance from the Ukrainian military, but also ordinary people. It was unexpected for Moscow, clearly.
So they pulled back from Kyiv.
By early April 2022, yeah, they abandoned that push, withdrew their forces from around the capital, a major setback for their initial goals.
But later in 2022, Ukraine went on the offensive.
They did. Successful counteroffensives in late summer, early autumn. They managed to liberate huge swaths of territory. Up in the northeast, Kharkiv region, and down south, including Kherson City, which was really significant.
But then Russia declared annexations, even of areas they didn't fully control.
In September 2022, yeah, declared they were annexing 4 partially occupied provinces. Another move widely condemned, no legal standing internationally, rejected by almost everyone at the UN.
And after those setbacks and annexations, Putin announced mobilization in Russia.
A partial mobilization, a conscription drive, which led to quite an exodus. A lot of Russian men left the country to avoid the draft.
What about 2023? How did things look then?
Well, the war definitely continued. Both sides tried launching offensives, but frankly, neither made huge territorial gains. The front lines got really heavily fortified, became more of a grinding stalemate in many areas, very bloody, lots of destruction, but not much movement.
And the conflict even spilled over the border into Russia itself.
That happened too. August 2024, Ukrainian forces apparently crossed into Russia's Kursk region. Ukraine claimed they took some ground, captured Russian soldiers.
And then this North Korea angle, that seems new.
It's a more recent and, yeah, maybe surprising development. Reports started surfacing late 2024, U.S. and NATO talking about potential North Korean troops getting involved. And then by April 2025, Russia actually confirmed it, said North Korean soldiers were providing significant assistance in fighting around Kursk.
Wow. And throughout all this, the human cost, reports of war crimes.
Tragically, yes. Numerous credible reports attributed to both sides, actually.
Yeah.
The UN has documented really severe violations by Russian forces in the areas they occupy, things like arbitrary arrests, torture, trying to force Russian language and culture, that's Russification, making people take Russian passports.
And allegations against Ukrainian forces, too.
And there have been allegations of mistreatment of POWs by Ukrainian forces as well, yes.
Beyond the human toll, what about other impacts? Resources, energy?
Huge impact there, too. The war has definitely messed with natural resources, and it's poured fuel on existing gas disputes. We saw explosions on major gas pipelines, remember the Nord Stream sabotage, big implications for Europe's energy supply. And the whole history of Russia-Ukraine gas transit has always been tense.
And the hybrid warfare aspect continued after the invasion. Cyber attacks, disinformation.
Absolutely. Major cyber attacks on critical infrastructure in Ukraine, like power grids. You might remember the NotPetya ransomware attack back in 2017, which actually hit globally. That was linked to this conflict, too. And yes, the information war has been relentless. Russia pushing constant propaganda, trying to deny Ukrainian identity, pushing false stories.
Like the one people narrative.
Exactly. Which, it's important to stress, Ukrainians themselves overwhelmingly reject.
How has all this changed the Russia-NATO relationship?
Fundamentally, any limited cooperation there was evaporated after Crimea in 2014. Putin keeps repeating claims, false claims, that NATO expansion is a threat. And Russia increasingly frames this whole thing as a proxy war with NATO.
It's also weird that neither side has actually declared war formally.
It is significant, isn't it? Russia sticks to calling it a special military operation, which really downplays the scale and the reality of the aggression.
But Ukraine has had a lot of outside help.
Oh, definitely. Massive amounts of military, financial, humanitarian aid, especially from the U.S. and other Western nations. That support has been absolutely vital for Ukraine's ability to resist.
And how has this impacted how Ukrainians see Russians?
Profoundly, before the war, opinions were more mixed. Many Ukrainians felt positively towards ordinary Russians. Since the full-scale invasion, sentiment is overwhelmingly negative, deeply negative now.
What about Russian public opinion? Harder to gauge.
Much harder. There seems to be some level of support for this special military operation, but measuring that accurately is tough when dissent isn't really tolerated. And, going back to the start, even the experts don't fully agree on when the war began. Some say 2014 with Crimea and Donbass. Others point to 2022 as the real start. It shows how linked it all is.
Yeah, those different views really underline just how long and complicated the history is here.
Yeah.
It wasn't just one single event.
Not at all. Deep roots, interconnected phases.
So if we try to pull it all together, this deep dive really shows a conflict unfolding in stages, right? First, the annexation of Crimea, then the war kicking off in the Donbass, followed by the massive escalation of the full-scale invasion, leading to where we are now, intense fighting, huge destruction, kind of a deadlock in many ways.
Yeah, it's a long, complex story. Definitely not something that just started in February 2022.
And hopefully this overview has helped you, the listener, get a more structured handle on it all, a way to see the bigger picture beyond just the daily news updates.
Yeah, to grasp the context and the key moments in this really multifaceted crisis.
So thinking about all this, the deep history, the outside players getting involved now, like North Korea, the huge geopolitical shifts, what do you think the really long-term consequences might be, beyond just who controls which territory? What kind of world emerges from this?
That's a massive question. It's definitely something to ponder. The ripples could spread very far indeed.